My name is Vethric Sol, and for 31 years, I have run the intake pharmacy at Halvernhold, a processing station that sits in high orbit over a mining belt nobody important cares about. My job is small and unglamorous. When a detainee comes through the lock, I administer the compliance dose, I watch the readouts settle, and I sign the chit that says the prisoner can be moved without an escort of 4. In 31 years, I had never once had to write anything else on that chit. The night this changed, we had 3 from the same seizure. Freighter had been running refined stimulant salts out of the belt in canisters, stamped as agricultural sealant, and the boarding team had pulled the crew off in restraints. Plus 1 passenger who wasn't crew at all, a human, ex-military by the build and the way he stood, who had apparently been hired on as cargo muscle, without being told what the cargo actually was. He came through the lock last, hands bound, and he looked at the room the way you look at a waiting room. Bored, patient, like he'd been in worse rooms. The 2 freighter crew went first. Standard procedure, a measured dose of Sedative, 400 micrograms per kilo of estimated mass, delivered subdermal at the base of the neck. 90 seconds later, both of them had the loose, half-lidded look I'd seen 10,000 times: pulse down, muscle tone down, particular calm that makes it being easy to walk down a corridor without an argument. I signed their chits and sent them through. Then I did the human. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only thing that matters in my work. I did not do anything differently. The dose was calculated the same way. 400 micrograms per kilo, his mass read off the floor plate to the gram, the injector set and fired exactly as it had been for the other 2. I have administered Sedative more than 40,000 times. I know what it looks like going in, and I know what it looks like working. It went in. He didn't flinch. Humans apparently don't flinch much. Or this one didn't, and he kept looking at the room the same way he had been looking at it. 90 seconds passed. I checked the readout. Pulse, steady. Muscle tone, unchanged. Pupil response, unchanged. I assumed reasonably that the injector had misfired, so I checked the cartridge. It had discharged fully. The dose was in him. I waited another 90 seconds because sometimes, with a species new to our registry, sometimes the compound takes a little longer to cross into effect. Nothing changed. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glanced at the door and said, to nobody in particular, "Is this going to take a while? I've got somewhere to be. I want you to understand that this is, on its own, not an alarming sentence." What was alarming was the steadiness of the voice that said it. Sedative doesn't just sedate the body. It flattens effect. A being under a working dose doesn't make small talk about appointments. A being under a working dose generally doesn't say anything at all. Protocol, when a first dose produces no measurable effect, is to assume an estimation error and escalate to the second tier. 600 micrograms per kilo is the dose calibrated for the heaviest-bodied species in the registry. Things with 3 livers and a resting metabolism that runs cold. I administered it. I want to note that by Concord regulation, this is already an unusual amount of compound to put into a being that size, and I did it anyway. Because the alternative was reporting that the equipment had failed twice in a row, and I did not believe that yet. 90 seconds. Then 180. His pulse came up, not down up, by about 6 beats, which I initially read as the readout glitching, until I checked it against the secondary sensor and got the same number. He rubbed the back of his neck where the injector site was, the way you'd rub a spot where a mosquito had bitten you, and said, "Did that do something? It's a little warm." That was the moment I called the duty warden. Warden Isbreak came down to the bay in under 4 minutes, which tells you how the call sounded to dispatch. She's run security on this station for longer than I've run the pharmacy, and she has the particular calm of someone who has personally handled every kind of emergency this station can produce. Twice, she looked at the readouts, looked at the human, who, to his credit, was sitting now on the restraint bench with the patient expression of someone waiting for a bus, and asked me the only question that mattered. Has this happened before? I didn't know. So did the thing we should have done after the first reading. We pulled the archivist. Archivist Cole Marin has spent 11 years cataloging the Concord's pharmacological registry, the working dose response curve for every species we have ever processed through any Concord facility going back almost 3 centuries. It is by volume one of the largest single datasets the Concord maintains, because it is the dataset that lets us run detention stations with a staff of 9 instead of 90. Sedative dose curve is logarithmic. Small-bodied species need very little. Large-bodied, slow metabolism species need more. But the curve always bends. There is always a dose, somewhere on the chart, where the compound binds faster than the body can clear it, and the being goes under. Across 1,412 cataloged species, that dose has never failed to exist. Cole pulled the human entry. There wasn't much in it. A species designation logged 80-some years ago from a single border encounter, with a provisional dose curve extrapolated from mass and a handful of physiological markers. Never confirmed, because in 80 years apparently, nobody had ever needed to confirm it. The extrapolated curve put the human's working dose at roughly 550 micrograms per kilo. We had now given this man 1,000, and then Cole found the other thing. Buried in a maintenance log from 41 years ago, at a different station entirely, was a single incident report. An injector malfunction during intake processing, compound administered, no observable effect, subject remained ambulatory and cooperative throughout. Unit flagged for recalibration and replaced. Species of the detainee in that report, human. The injector had been recalibrated. It had presumably worked perfectly on the next 1,000 detainees of 1,000 other species, because the injector had never been the problem. 41 years. Nobody had connected it, because in 41 years this station had processed exactly 2 humans, and the first time, somebody had written down equipment failure and moved on, because that explanation requires nothing further of anyone. I asked Cole to run the numbers properly this time. Not an extrapolation, an actual estimate from what we just measured. Human hepatic and renal throughput, she came back and told me, appears to be high enough that a standard dose of Sedative is metabolized and cleared. From the bloodstream, in roughly the same window, the compound needs to cross the blood-brain barrier and bind. It doesn't fail to work because the dose is wrong. It fails to work because the body finishes processing it before it can start working. Every time, regardless of how much you give it, because more compound just means more for the liver to burn through in the same window. There is, mathematically, no dose, not no safe dose, no dose. Cole said it twice like she wanted to hear if it sounded different the second time. It didn't. Warden Brake didn't say anything for a while. She looked at the human, who by now had noticed we were all looking at him, and had the faint, slightly apologetic expression of a man who suspects he's caused an inconvenience without knowing how. "Can I ask," he said, "is the warm thing normal? Because I feel like I could run a few laps right now." Nobody answered him. Warden Brake had me run the 3rd tier anyway. Not anyone expected it to work, but because regulation requires the data point, and I think she needed, personally, to watch the number fail one more time before she'd let herself believe it. It failed the same way. Pulse came up another 4 beats. He asked if there was somewhere he could get water. I signed his chit. There was no box on the form for what I actually needed to write, so I wrote it in the margin, by hand. The way nobody has needed to write anything in that margin in 31 years. Subject moved to holding under physical restraint only. Chemical compliance not achievable. Any dose. Warden Brake filed her own report that night, and I've since heard, secondhand, the way you hear things on a station this size, that it went further up the chain than reports from this bay usually go. The line in it that people repeat to me, when they bring it up at all, is the simple one. Every species we have ever processed has a dose. We built our entire intake system on the fact that there is always a dose. There is one species in the registry for which that is not true. 31 years. Every time we'd had the chance to learn that, we wrote down equipment failure instead, because that was the easier thing to believe. We don't write it down anymore.